Hello, future front-end or back-end or full-stack web developers. Welcome to the beginning of your exciting journey into the world of web development. In this course, we will explore the essential technologies and best practices that will equip you with the skills needed to become a proficient full-stack developer. Our first step on this journey starts with the HTML. The foundation of all web pages. So, what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. This is a standard language used to create design documents on the web page, and HTML provides the structure of a web page, allowing us to define elements such as headings, paragraphs, links, images, and so much more. It serves as a skeleton of any site, giving it a meaningful layout and enabling browsers to render content in an organized manner. So why learning HTML? Understanding HTML is very crucial for several reasons. One is foundation of web development. HTML is a building block of any web development. Whether you are creating a simple web page or a complex web application, HTML is where it all begins. And next point is structure and content. HTML helps structure your content effectively, ensuring that your information is presented clearly and logically to users. And third is interactivity and styling. While HTML provides the structure only, it works hand in hand with CSS, and that is for styling, and JavaScript for interactivity to create dynamic and visually appealing sites. Don't worry, we have a section to talk about CSS and JavaScript. And lastly is SEO and accessibility. When I say SEO, it simply means search engine optimization. So, for proper use of HTML ensures that your sites are search engine friendly and accessible to all users, including those with disabilities. In this section, you will learn the basic syntax and structure of HTML, how to create and format text, how to add links, images, multimedia like videos, audios to your site, and how to create forms for user input and best practices for writing clean and semantic HTML code. This particular section or this course is designed to be interactive and hands-on. You will engage in practical exercises, projects, and real-world examples to reinforce your learning. By the end of this section, you will have solid understanding of HTML and be able to create well-structured web pages. To get started, all what you need is your text editor and a web browser. We will guide you through setting up your development environment and creating your first HTML document. We are so happy to have you join us on this journey by learning HTML, which is your first step towards becoming a full-stack web developer, and we are here to support you every step of the way. Get ready to dive into the world of web development and unleash your creativity. Happy coding, and see you in the next video. Now that we know what is ahead of us in this particular section, before we get into that, let's understand this concept, and that is apps component or web application component, which means what makes up the application that you and I are using every single blessed day. Let's say you are using YouTube or Facebook. Have you ever asked yourself, how does it work? So, let's dive in more to see the components of the web applications that we use every day. We are going to use YouTube as an example. Let's say for YouTube, as soon as you enter the URL, it presents you the interface, in this case, this one, for example. and let's say you want to upload videos, unless you create an account. And then you can go ahead and upload your videos or go live. Now, as soon as you upload or create an account, what goes behind the scene? Or how come you can upload videos and see it on the fly or on the page? Have you ever asked yourself, how does it work? Let's take it in layman understanding when it comes to app component. So let's say as soon as I log in, YouTube presents me with a different interface depending on my authentication status. In this case, I have logged in and this is my dashboard. And also, if I want to customize my channel, I have a template or UI like this. As you can see, we have different layouts with different logics. Now, let's get back to the component of web applications. Let's take YouTube as an example. As soon as you enter youtube.com, it presents you with this UI. And this is what we call the front end. And that is what the user sees and interacts with is the front end part of it. Any application, what you see visually is the front end. And then what goes behind the scene is what we call the back end. And let's say as soon as you upload video, where does it go? It is going to be saved in what is called databases or database. So these are the components of web application, comprises of the front end, back end, and database. And as a web developer, you can specialize in any of these, either only on the front end or back end or database administrations. And to achieve this, we call something programming languages. We are going to use languages to build each of these components. Let's begin with the front end, and that is, if you want to focus on front end, you're going to need the following: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We have a video to talk about the roles of each of these. At the moment, understand that we're going to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for the front end. And then for the back end, we have these programming languages, either PHP, Java, Python, JavaScript, and C++. For JavaScript here, we're going to use what is called Node.js. So these two, I can say they are JavaScript. And for database, we can use MongoDB or MySQL or any database services providers. So now we know the components of web application. So if you know the front end, back end, and database, then you are a full stack web developer. But let's move step by step to begin with the front end web development. So we are going to focus on the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for the meantime. From there, we will implement or learn other concepts as well. Let's look at the role of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML simply means hypertext markup language, and CSS is cascading style sheet. For these two, and that is HTML and CSS, they are not programming languages, but instead, HTML is hypertext language and CSS is what? Cascading style sheet. But JavaScript is a language. So let's look at the relationship or the roles. Let's begin with the HTML. HTML forms the foundation of your web application, just like building a house. First, you will need a land. Then you will need the foundation of your house. So we can say that HTML is a skeleton or the foundation of your house. When it comes to web applications, HTML is a foundation or the structure or the skeleton of your application. After you got your house, it is time for you to paint it to make it more beautiful. This is where CSS comes in. So I can say that CSS is for customization of your house, in this case, your web applications. Now you have your house being painted with all the decorations. It is time for you to add interactivity to it. For example, to be able to open a door, ring a bell, and do other stuffs. This is where JavaScript comes in. Let's look at this scenario. Before you build any app, first of all, you plan, and that is the structure of your site. Let's represent this car as the application that we are going to build. First of all, you have the structure of the car or our web application. This is where HTML comes in. And in an English term, we will regard HTML as a noun. Now that we have the structure of our application or the house, it is time for us to make it more beautiful. This is where CSS comes in. At this point, we have customized our car. Let's assume that it is the same car. In here, we have added some colors and then the color of the light as well. This is where CSS comes in. In an English term, we will regard HTML as the adjective, meaning that it describes more about the noun. And a noun is a name of an object, a person, or anything. Now that we have our car, it is not doing anything. It is time for us to move the car. This is where JavaScript comes in. In this case, we have the engine of the car. So the engine here is a JavaScript because it's going to help it to add some interactivity to it. For example, being able to move, go back, able to play the horn, the light, and everything is being done by JavaScript. So as soon as you have your site without JavaScript, it is not interactive. So JavaScript is going to add interactivity to your application. And in an English term, we call it as a verb, meaning that it is doing something. Now that we know the relationship between these components, we are going to begin with HTML. But before that, unless we set up our environment to get started, let's continue in the next video. Before we get into the actual coding, unless we set up our environment, this is what we call development environment setup. And for the meantime, we are going to use the following tools. One is text editor and then the browser. When we say text editor, it is going to help us to write our code. When it comes to text editors, we have a lot of them. Talking about Notepad++, Sublime, Atom, and others. But the one that we are going to use, which is popular, modern, and free, is called VS Code. Meaning we're going to use VS Code to code and the browser to show or display the code that we have written. That is for rendering our site and for debugging. So let's go ahead and then install the two tools. In case you don't have Chrome, you can go ahead and search for Chrome and then download for your operating system. For me, I have one. Better still, you can use Firefox, but I would advise you to use Chrome because it supports or makes development much easier. The next one is the VS Code. So search for VS Code and then click on the first search result. Or better still, you can go to code.visualstudio.com. As you can see here, it has been detected my operating system. So go ahead and download for your operating system, or you can click here to see more option, and that is the download. And here you can download for Windows, Ubuntu, or Mac. For me, I have already downloaded, and this is a preview by the time of recording this video. Now that we have our Visual Studio Code, let us know the layout of this editor. Back to the presentation here, which is this one. And in here, we have these icons. One is search, and then the Explorer to collapse the sidebar, and then version control, debugging, and then here we can download more themes or extensions to improve our Visual Studio Code. And at the top here, we call it as the top bar. As soon as you open a new file, you're going to see it being added at the top bar. And then this is where you're going to write our actual code. And bottom here, that is the bottom bar, will contain other information about your Visual Studio Code. For example, the language that you are going to use. Now that we know the layout, let's get back to the red demo here. If I click on this, as you can see, I can collapse the sidebar. And in here, in case I have many files, I can make a search. And this is what we call the debugging. For the meantime, we are going to ignore the debugging and then the source control. But instead, we're going to focus on the extensions. So in here, for example, in case you don't want the color of your theme, you can do that. Don't worry, we have a video to talk about how we can customize our Visual Studio Code. At the moment, let's leave it as default. Now that we know the tools we are going to use, in the next video, we are going to create or develop our first HTML website. Let's continue in the next video. Now that we have our environment being set up, it is time to get into code. I'm going to show you the process involved when building a website. So let's continue. The first step is that you need to know the kind of site or app that you want to build. Let's say we are going to build a site for a school. So first step is that you need a folder that is going to contain all the files about your project. So I will say school project or my first HTML code. The naming is up to you. You can use camel casing or uppercasing. So I'm going to maintain something like this. The naming of the folder is up to you. So next step is that we are going to open this folder in our text editor. And we have a couple of ways. Either dragging this one and then place it inside your Visual Studio Code. Or you can go to File and then the Open folder and locate where your folder is, in this case, this one. Now I have opened my folder. I'm done with the first step. The second step is that we need to have the file that we are going to write our code. Let me increase the zoom level. Now to do that, we have these icons. If I hover my mouse on it, you're going to see the name of the icon. This is what we call new file, meaning if you want to create a new file, and this is new folder to organize your project. And this is refresh and then collapse folder in the Explorer. So click on this icon or right click and click on new. We are going to have our first file. The name of the file, it can be anything, but it must be descriptive. Normally, we use index for homepage. Let's say we are creating something about us. It is going to be about us. But let's begin with the homepage or home or index as that. And the most important part here is the extension. So bring period and then type HTML. That is the extension. This one will tell VS Code that, hey, VS Code, we want to write it in HTML. In case you want to code using JavaScript, it's going to be .js. When I say extension, anything that comes after the dot becomes your extension. For CSS, it's going to be .css. For Python, it's going to be py. But let's begin with HTML. So hit enter. Now this is our canvas for us to code. As you can see, for coding, you don't have the GUI or the UI. For example, when using word processing, you have all the tools. For example, if you want to add text, you add a text. If you want to increase the font size, you do it. But for coding, it is not like that. So in here, I'm going to write my first HTML code or website. I will say, hello world, welcome to my first website. As you can see, we have this icon. This means that our file is not being saved and we have it as +1. This means that we have a code that has not been saved on a certain file, in this case, one file. To save it, come to File and then Save All or Save. As you can see, the icon is gone. So I'm done with my coding. It is time for us to visualize this one in our browser. To do it, open the folder. And then there is the file that we just added. So open that. As you can see, I have Hello World, welcome to my first website. At this point, you may be asking that if I want to change the font size or increase the font size, what should I do? And like I said, that this is not like using Microsoft Word where we have all the tools. So to change or to increase the font size, we are going to use code for that. This is what we call the HTML tags. So in the next video, we will talk about HTML tags. Let's continue in the next video. We are going to talk about the right way to structure our HTML code. And that is the most recommended way when writing HTML. Because of that, I will show you the syntax when it comes to writing HTML code. Because of that, I'm going to create a new folder or project for it. I have renamed the previous project as my first website. I'm going to add one as concept number 2. You can name it whatever you want. I will say HTML structure. So in future, if you take this project, you will know what it means. I'm going to open it in my text editor. I'm going to add the file as index.html. At this point, you know what we are doing. So, how to write HTML code? We need to follow this syntax. First step is that we're going to bring less than and then the greater than. This is what we call the angle bracket in HTML. So whatever you place in here becomes your tag. Let's say you want to increase the font size of your text. We have a tag for it. In the next video, we will talk more about tags. Anything that you place in the opening angle bracket becomes a tag. So even if I say IMA here, IMA is a tag because it is inside the angle bracket. But we have the right tags. So the next step is that we have to close the angle bracket. So I will say the / as that. So in here, our text goes in between this, meaning that what is inside here is going to customize our text. If I say welcome, and then if I save it and then open the project, which is this one, as you can see, we have it as it is in the code. To write meaningful HTML code to customize the text, we're going to provide what is called a tag. So we have one tag called heading tags. And one rule is that if you open it as that, you have to close it as that. That's a rule. So this is what we call the opening and then the closing tag, because we have the / as that. With this, if I save it and then reload the application, as you can see, it has been customized. The takeaway here is understand what is a tag and then the syntax for writing the tag. And we have two types of tags, self-closing and non-self-closing tag. This is closing tag, and that is the H1 because it has the closing tag as that. We have a tag that is non-self-closing tag, for example, input. For input, I can ignore the closing tag and then inside I will say placeholder and I will say enter name. And if I do that, as you can see, it worked. Don't worry, we have a section to talk more about tags. The takeaway here is that understand how to write HTML tags by using the opening and then the closing tags. So let's focus on the main concept, and that is how we can structure our HTML code. The first step is that you bring your less than and then dot doc type. What does it mean? This simply means that it will determine the version of our HTML code that we are using. Likewise, we have different versions when it comes to electronics like phones. We have iPhone 12, 13, 14, and the rest. So why do we have versions of those electronics? Simply because the current version is an improvement of the previous one. Likewise, programming, we have different versions of the languages that we are using. When it comes to JavaScript, we have ES7, ES6, and the rest. Likewise, Python, we have Python 3 and the rest. The same thing applies to HTML, we have different versions. The doc type will determine the current version of the HTML that we are using. If you do this one, it simply means that we are using the current version of HTML. For the version, you don't care about that. As soon as you bring this one, we know that we are using the current version. The next step is that before I continue, as you can see, this is self-closing tag. Because you don't have the closing tag as that. Alright, next step is you bring the HTML. As you can see, the editor is smart to close my tag for me. So if I bring enter here, I have some space to work with. So in the HTML, it is going to wrap our entire application. And then in the opening tag here, we are going to specify what is called an attribute called lang, and that is language. If you want to use English, it's going to be EN. This simply means that we are instructing our HTML that we are going to write it in English. The next step is the head. So I will say head and then close it as that. In the head here, we are going to provide additional tags or any customization that we can use it in our HTML. For example, we can write CSS code here. At the same time, we can embed or link JavaScript in the head tag. And then in the head tag, we have what is called the title. If I close it, as you can see, this is non-self-closing tag. The title here is going to be displayed at the title bar of our browser. If you go to youtube.com, over here we have what is called the YouTube over here. That is the title of YouTube. If you go to macenter.com, that's our official website. This is our title. At the moment, what we have done is that it picks the name of the file that we created. But we can pass in what is called title here, and I will say HTML structure. If I do that and save it and reload, as you can see, I have the title here as HTML structure. Alright, so now we know that in the head, we can provide what is called a title. And then we can pass in additional tags. For the meantime, we are going to maintain this. And then after the head tag, we call something the body. The body is going to contain the information that is going to be visible to the end user. So in here, I can say the H1 and I will say welcome to Macenter Coding School. If I do that and save it and then reload, we have something on the body. So the visible part of your browser is the body. The next step is the footer. So in here, I'll type in the angle bracket and then the footer. And the footer will contain some information like the copyright and some links that's going to point to your application. So in short, this is how we structure our HTML code. And we are going to focus mostly in the body here. This is where you're going to write most of our code. That's going to be visible to the end user. The takeaway here is that understand the structure of your HTML code and what it means. And for this one, we have a shorthand syntax to do it. So as soon as you become familiar with this, understanding how it works, I'm going to remove it and use Shift and then 1. Then press enter. As you can see, we have the auto-generated code using Emmet. For the meantime, remove these two tags. I don't want to confuse you with more concepts. Let's maintain it to make it more simple as that. So I will say HTML structure, and then head 1, I will say welcome to Massen Tech Coding School. And then reload, and we have it as that. There's a format that we are going to follow anytime you start to write HTML code. Now that we know the structure, it is time for us to learn more about the HTML tags. Let's continue in the next video. Let's talk more about HTML tags. An HTML tag is a code element that defines the structure and the content of web pages. And tags are used to create elements such as headings, paragraphs, links, images, and so much more on a web page. Each HTML tag consists of a name enclosed in an angle bracket, and most tags come in pairs with an opening tag and closing tag. So let's read more about this one. Like I said, that HTML tags come in pairs, and that is opening and then the closing tag. The opening tags may have what is called attributes for behavior or appearance. When I say attribute, let's take a lady as an example. A lady can put on different hairstyles, and that is the attribute. Either chains or any uniform or clothes that's going to improve her appearance. This is what we call the attribute. So a tag can have an attribute, and some tags are self-closing tags. And some tags are self-closing, as I said in the previous video, and the tags instruct the browser how to render the enclosed content. Let's get back to the code that we wrote. As soon as we write h1, we are instructing the browser that, hey browser, try to display the content in a bigger font. That's all what tag is all about. Let's read more about it. And we have two types of tags. The first one is non-self-closing tags. As you can see, we have the opening tag here. We have the angle bracket here, and then this one, and then inside we have the tag name. And this is the closing one. This is what we call the non-self-closing tags. And then we have the content that's going to be visible on the page. And then in the opening tag for this one, we have additional properties, a key, and then the value. This is what we call the attribute. The attribute modifies the behavior of the tag. We can say that we can change the color of this tag. This is what we call the attribute. So in summary, the tag, the attribute, the content is what we call an element. And apart from this one, we also have what is called self-closing tags. For self-closing tags, we don't have the closing tag as we did before. It has the opening tag and then close by itself. And we can pass in additional attributes. Now that we know the types of tags, the next video, we will talk about the HTML common tags. Let's continue in the next video. Now that we know what are tags and how to structure HTML code, it is time for us to learn more about tags. We have a lot of them. In this video, I'm going to show you the most common ones. I'm going to add a new folder as concept number 3, and I will name it as common tags. And I'm going to open it in the editor as that. And I'm going to add my file as index.html and then scaffold the HTML structure and rename the title as common HTML tags. and I'm going to provide what is called H1 for heading, and I'm going to name it as common. Alright, so let me open this one, and we have it as that. Let me close the previous ones. The first one is called the heading tags, and we have already used the first one. H means heading, and the heading tags ranges from 1 up to 6. The lower the value, the bigger the font. So in here, I'm gonna have the first H1, and to make our life easier, always type the name of the tag as H1 and then hit enter, and we have the autocomplete. I will say heading 1, and I'm gonna copy this one for the heading 2. Change this one to heading 2. Likewise, this one to heading 2, and then copy and paste, change this one to heading 3, and then heading 3, and also heading 3. Copy again, paste, heading 4, and here as heading 4, and then 4. Copy and paste, heading 5, and then lastly is the heading 6. Here's 5 instead, and then change this one to 6, and then 6. Save it, and let's see the differences now. Reload, and we have the headings as that. Heading 1 being bigger, and it goes below as that. Now that we know how to use the heading, the next one is the paragraph. So here I will say P for paragraph and then enter. The paragraph is going to present the text in a paragraph manner. So I will say the first paragraph, I'll hit enter and then have some dummy text by typing lorem and then hit enter. As you can see, I have a scroll bar here, and to avoid this one, we are going to customize our Visual Studio Code. To do that, click on the clock icon and then the settings, and then type wrap. And then as you can see, word wrap is off, and then change to on. As you can see, it is being wrapped. Sorry, I have to open the file again. All right. So if I save this and then reload, it has been presented in the paragraph manner. If I add one more paragraph as P and enter this and save it and reload, we have 2 paragraphs. The next step is what we call the line break. Let's say I want to have some breaks in my paragraph. Let's say I want to break it after the emet here. If I do that and then save it, do you expect it to be something like this? Let's see. The browser is not obeying that. And to achieve the breaking, we're going to use what is called a tag. And this tag is called the self-closing tag. So type in BR and then enter. As you can see, this is what we call the line break. If I do that and then reload, as you can see, I have braked the line. Let me increase the zoom level to see it more visually. Alright, so now we have the paragraph and then the line break. Alright, the next one is what we call the horizontal rule. If I want to have some line, it's going to be as HR. That is the horizontal rule. With this one, save it and then reload, and we have the line as that. And next step is what we call the anchor. The anchor is going to point to a link. Let's say that we want a user to visit youtube.com or to our website from our application. Copy the URL that we want a user to visit, and then in here type A for anchor or link, and then hit enter. For link, we have this attribute called the href, and the value for the href is where we're going to point the user to when the user click on this link. In this case, the user should go to masintech.com, and I will say go to our school or visit, and save it, and let's see. As you can see, we have it here as visit our school. If I click on that, it has opened the link that I provided. But as you can see, when I click on this, it has replaced our application. And we can open it in a new tab by using one more attribute called target. For attributes, you can place it wherever you want, either here or here as target. And then we have the following. If I say blank, now let's see. If I reload, click on that, as you can see, it has opened in a new window. So depending how you want it, you can choose it. After that, we're gonna have what is called image. So in case I wanna use some image in my application, I'm gonna use image as img and then enter. And in here, we have the following attribute. The source simply means the source of the image that we want to link. And then the alt is going to contain a value that's going to be visible in case the image is not being found. And this is also for accessibility for visually impaired users. So in here, we can provide two types of links or images. Let's say we have an image hosted on a different website like pizzabay.com. In here, let's say I want an image, for example, this car. I will click on that and then right click and then copy image address back to the code, paste it here, and then for the alt, I will say image of a car. Save it and then reload, and we have the image here. And this image, we can control the width and height of it by using an attribute called width. And if I say 500 pixels, then the height is also 500 pixels. Don't worry, we have a section to talk about CSS. With this one, we load and we have it as start. And I can also download the image and place it in my project. So in here, let me search for different image. For example, this one. And then click here to download. Let me download and here is the image. I'm going to place it in my project as that. I want to use this image in my project. So back to the HTML, I'm going to have one more image. And in this case, I'm going to reference the image that has been saved in my project. So in here, I'm going to use // and then the name of the image, and I will say car2. And with this one, let's see, reload, and we have it as car2. So assuming that the image is not being found, let me remove this one, and let's see, reload. As you can see, the alt value is being shown. In this case, the image is for car2. Alright, so let me bring back to that. Let's say that I want to have some list. I'm going to use what is called ordered and then the unordered list. So I will say UL to represent what is called unordered list, and then LI, and then type in the name of the list. Let's say I want to have a list of programming languages. I'm going to provide H1 and I will say list of languages or programming languages. The first one is JavaScript, and then the next LI is going to be Python, and then the next LI is going to be Java. With this one, save it and reload, and we have list of languages and we have them as that. This dot here is because of the tag called UL and then the LI. Now that we have the unordered list, what about the ordered list? I'm going to copy the same thing here, and then let me add some rule here as HR and change this one to, or let me maintain the languages here, but for ordered list, the difference here is change this one to OL, and here as what? OL. With this one, save it and let's see. Reload, and we have different version. The difference here is the numbering. This is what we call the ordered, and that is the OL. The next one is what we call the definition list. I'm going to copy the same thing here, plus the HR, and then instead of the OL is going to be DL. And then individual here is going to be as DT. Now let's see the effect now. Reload. And this is what we call the definition list. In case this is what you want in your application, then you can choose any of these. These are the common tags that we're going to use day in, day out, but we have a lot of them. In the next video, we will talk about how we can format text. But before that, we will talk about commenting in HTML. Let's continue in the next video. Let's talk about comment when it comes to programming. And you're going to use comments irrespective of any language that you are going to use. So what are comments in respect to HTML? In HTML, comments are pieces of code that are not displayed in the browser, but are included in the HTML document for one, reference, documentation, or explanation purposes. And comment is going to help us to understand the structure and the purpose of our code, making it easier to read and maintain. And they're very useful. Let's take this code for example. Let's say after some months or years and you come back to this code. Sometimes you may forget what this code means. And let's say you are building a railroad project with different developers. And each developer has its own style of writing code. So if you use comment, it's going to help you to explain the purpose of that code. And when you're beginning to learn programming, mostly we use comment to write notes. So for this code, we are going to comment it so that we can make reference to it. So how to do it? The first step is that you bring the less than and then the exclamation mark and then 4 dashes, and then the editor has closed it as that. So in here we can enter any text. So I will say heading tags. Now if I save this one and then preview it in the browser, as you can see, that comment is nowhere to be found, but it's going to guide me as a programmer to know the code that's below it. For example, H1 means what? Heading tags. And then for the P tag is for what? Paragraph. So the same thing, I'm going to use P tag, and we have a shortcut for the comment. On Mac, press Command and then the /. And then here I'm going to use as what? The line break is a BR. So I can put it like this one as BR for line break. And we have what is called multi-line comment. Let's say I want to write more notes. To do it, let me come down here and have my comment, and then we can expand it and we can write any comment here. This is what we call the multi-line comment. So let me remove this, and I know that this is the line break because I have the BR here, and the next one is going to be the horizontal rule. And then we have one for the anchor, and this one is for image, but for this one is image using local, and this is what we call the unordered, and this is called the ordered list, and this is definition list. As we move on, I'll be using comment. Let's continue in the next video. Let's talk about text formatting tags, which means that they are tags that are used to style and format text to make it more readable and visually appealing. And these tags can change the appearance of the text by making it bold, italic, underline, or even adding other styles. When we get to CSS, we can format it more. But we also have some tags for formatting. Because of that, I'm going to have a new folder for this concept as text formatting tags. And I'm going to open it in the VS Code and add one file called index.html. Let me scaffold using the emit and hit enter. Let me collapse this and I will say text formatting. And let me preview that. And we have empty canvas. So I'm going to provide a heading by using h1 and I will say HTML formatting element demonstration. And let's see the preview. Alright, so let's begin with the first tag, and that is block quote with site attribute. Let's write the code for you to understand it. I'm going to add the comment as block quote with site attribute. Let's say that you got a code from a certain website. You can cite that website. So you're going to have the block quote as this, and then open that, and inside you are going to write the text. So here I will say this is a quotation from a different source or a different website. And in the opening tag, provide the site. And the site here, let's say that we got the code from masintech.com. I'm going to provide the site here. And then below it, I'm going to provide the site. I'm going to place it in a p tag. This is what we call nesting, meaning that we can place another tag in a different tag. This is what we call nesting. So for text formatting, we can place them in p tags or divs. Don't worry, we have a section to talk about block and inline element. At the moment, understand that we can place other elements within an element. So in here, I'm going to bring in the site tag, and I'm going to say that source, and I will say masintech.com. Now with this one being added, let's reload, and this is what we have. As you can see, it has been formatted as what? A source or quotation. As you can see, the different format for this one. Let me increase the level, and this is what we have as a source. It has been what? Formatted. And the next one is called the kill, which is for inline quotation. So let me come down here and have the comment as kill for inline quotation. And it goes like this. I'll bring in the P. I'm going to have some content. I will say the author said HTML is the building block of web pages. Or we say that Masintech said. Alright, so with this one, I want to have quotation from the HTML up to this side. So here I'm going to cut it and then use kill for quote and then place my content. With this one, reload, and we have the quotation or quote being added for us as that. And the next one is abbreviation with title attribute. And it goes like this. I'm going to have p tag with some content. And I will say that the abbreviation is widely used in web development. And it reads like this: the abbreviation HTML is widely used in web development. And I want to abbreviate the HTML. So I'm going to cut the HTML and use ABBR for abbreviation. And then in the body here, I'm going to paste that. And it gives me the title by specifying more content about this one. So here is going to be as hypertext markup language. Now with this one, let me reload, and we have the abbreviation as the HTML. The next one is pre-formatted text. Let's say that we want to embed some code in our HTML, and to achieve that, we are going to use what is called pre tag for pre-formatted text. So I will say pre for, and it goes like this. I'm going to have the tag as pre-formatted, and then inside I'm going to write any code. For this, I'm going to use JavaScript code. And in case you are new to JavaScript, don't worry, we have a section to talk more about HTML. So here I'm going to write a function That's going to console log just hello. I will say the function name as hello, the function body. I'm just going to log. Alright, so now let's see the formatted text, and it looks like a code. And let's have one for address. In case you want to present some content like an address, we have a tag for it as address for contact information. And for this, we have a tag called address. And then inside, I will say written. And then I want to have some line break. So I'm going to use BR for it. And then after that, I will say visit us. Alright, so with this one, let's see the formatted. And indeed, it looks like an address. And let's have one for citation. After this one, the comment goes like this: cite for references to create works. And it goes like citation for references to creative works. Then the text is going to be, let me place it in p tag, and I want to cite the book. So I will say by cutting the main stack book here, or the title of the book up to this, and then I'm going to use citation and place the text. So with this one, let's see, and we have the book being cited as that. And we have the next tag, and that is BDO. And that is in case you want to read from left to right or right to left. So let's say we have some content in a paragraph, and I will say the text direction overridden. And then in the body here, that is BDO. For the content, I will say this will be displayed from right to left. So I'm going to provide the direction, and that is right to left. So let's see the changes now. Reload. As you can see, the direction of this one has been what? Overridden. And that is from right to left. And it goes like this will be displayed from right to left. Alright. That's a tag for that. And in case you want to bold some text, so here as B for bold. And let's say we have some content, and I will say this is bold text. And I want to bold this particular text here. I'm going to cut it and use B for bold, and then place the bold inside. And let's see, and indeed it has been bolded. And we also have a tag called strong. And this one is for strong emphasis. And it goes like this. I'm going to have the content in the p tag, and I will say this is, I want to strong this text. So here I'm going to use strong and then place the text. And let's see the preview. And indeed it is strong. And next one is italic. So here and I will say italic. For this one, I'm going to ignore the p tag, and I will say this is italic text. Alright, so let's see. And indeed the text is being italic. And next one is the EM. EM means emphasis. And let me use p tag, and I want to emphasize on a certain text. So I will say this is emphasized text, and I want to emphasize on this one. So here I'm going to use EM and then place the text and reload, and the text has been what? Emphasized. And the next one is called the small for smaller text. I'm going to have p tag, and I will say this is small text. So I want to make the small indeed small by using small and then place the small inside, meaning that this is what I want to make it small. And let's see, and indeed this one is smaller as compared to the other text. And we also have DL for deleted text. So here I'm going to have a text by placing them in the P tag, and I will say this is deleted text. And I want to format the deleted by using DL and then place that. Alright, so let's see the changes now. Well, it is not working. It's supposed to be DEL. Alright, so let's see, reload, and indeed it looks like it has been deleted. And we also have what is called ints for inserted element. I'm gonna have p tag, and I will say this is inserted text. And I want to format the inserted. I'm gonna use NES for inserted, and then let's see the changes now. And we have it being underlined. That looks like it has been what? Inserted. And we also have one for subscript, and I will say P, and this is subscript text. And I'm gonna use H. I want to write HO2 as a symbol. So here I'll write the uppercase H, and I'll use the subscript, and then I'm gonna pass in 2, and then at the end here I will say 0, and that is HO2 for water. That is the chemical symbol. And indeed we have it as that, meaning that we have subscripted the 2 to come below the other text. And we have one for superscript. So here I'm gonna write some equation. So I'm gonna have some p tag, and I will say this is superscript text y equal to mc2. So here as, and have y, which is equal to mc, and then the superscript, and I'm gonna have the 2 here, and let's see the equation. As you can see, the 2 has been what? Superscripted. And lastly, I'm gonna have one for U for underline. In case you want to underline some text, is equal to P, and then this is, I want to underline this underline, so I'm gonna cut that one and use U and place that. And let's see, and we have it being underlined. As you can see, with just HTML, we can use to format our text. With this one being said, let's continue in the next video. Let's talk about block level versus inline level element, which means that HTML elements are broadly categorized into block versus inline element, and each of these elements serves different purposes in terms of layout and presentation. Let's begin with block level element. Block level element creates a block of content that takes up the full width available, and that is by default. And they always start on a new line, and they often contain other block level element and inline element. So let's look at some of the characteristics of block level element. One is that they start on a new line, and they occupy the full width available, and they can contain other block level elements and inline elements. And also they respect margin and padding. This is a topic on its own, and that is box model when we get to CSS. The takeaway here is that for block level element, they always start on a new line, and they occupy the full width available, and they can contain other block level element and inline element. Let's say that this is our web page, that is our browser, and then we are going to design or build a website, and each of these represent an element. An element contains the tag, attribute, and the actual content. So let's say that this rectangle is our content. For example, H1. As soon as we add H1, you can see that it takes the full width. And as soon as I add one more tag, as you can see, it is beginning on a new line. This is what we call what? Block level element. So any element or tag that takes a new line is being regarded as a block level element. Understanding this will help you to know how your application or layout is going to behave. Likewise, this and that. Now, let's talk about inline element, which is this one over here. For inline elements, they do not start on a new line and only take up as much weight as necessary. And they are often used for smaller pieces of content within block level element. Let's look at some of the characteristics of inline element. It is opposite to block level element, and one is that they do not start on a new line, and they only take up as much weight as necessary, and they cannot contain block level element. But for block level element, it can take the inline element, and they also respect padding but not margin. Don't worry, I'll show you with some sample code. So let's look at the illustration first. Let's say that this is our web page, and then these are the elements on the web page. As soon as I add an element, it's going to take the available width. In case we have some space available, then the next one is going to be in line with this one without coming into a new line. This is what we call inline level element, and it goes on like that. With this one being said, let's get back to code to demonstrate that. I'm going to create a new folder as versus block level element. And I'm going to place it in my code editor. And I'm going to add the file as index.html. I'm going to scaffold as that. And then I will say inline versus block element. So let me have h1, and I will say the block level element. And the first one is the heading tag. So if I say welcome to Masin Tech Coding School, let's see where it will be appeared. Let me reload. As you can see, it has taken a new line. This is the first one, h1, and then this h1 also. Even if I use h6, it's going to take new line, meaning that heading tags are block level element. So let me bring back to h1 as that. And the next one is the p tag. If I add some content here, save it, and after reloading, as you can see, it has taken a new line as that. And let's talk about the inline element. They are mostly text formatting elements and other elements like a tag. If I say register, now let's see where it will appear. We have it here as register. But if I add one more, and if I say log in the code, they are on a new line, but in the browser, they are what? Inline. So this is what we call what? Inline level element. And if I say bold, and I will say this will be bold. Reload, and as you can see, they are inline. Even if I use U for underline, it will be on a new line. So I believe at this point, you know what are block level element and inline element. So at this point, you can say that if you want the inline element to behave like block level element, what should I do? When you get to CSS, we can change this behavior. But we also have one tag called div, which is div, which means division. And div is used to group elements that are related together. So any element that you place in a div will behave like block level element. And we're going to use div a lot. So let's say that I'm going to place the register in the div. Now let's see. As you can see that the register has taken a new line. Therefore, the other element will be on the next line. So if I want to change this one to block, I'll place in the div and reload, and this is what we have. Alright, so now that you know the block level element and then the division tag, and that is a div, let's continue in the next video to expand our knowledge when it comes to HTML. Let's talk about forms in HTML. So, what are forms? Forms are used to collect user input or data and then submit to a server for processing. And because of forms, we can create interactive and dynamic web applications where users can enter data such as login in credentials, search queries, feedback, and so much more. Let's see some real-world example, and that is using our official website, and that is masintech.com. In here, if I click on Join July Intake and then click on the Start, it is going to open a form for me to fill. So as soon as I enter my details, the data will be submitted to my backend server for processing, and that is saving the user details into my database. This is what we call forms, but take note about this. Before a user can enter a data, it needs a place to type. This is what we call input types. As you can see for this, I can enter my name here and then likewise the age. So one thing about input field is that they have different types, even though they look the same as you can see for this one and that. But the kind of data is different. For example, if we want username, the type of the input is going to be a text. And then for age, the type is equal to what? Number. With this one being said, let's get into Visual Studio Code to put them into practice. I have already created a folder called Forms, and I have added my index.html. And this is the skeleton of my HTML or the structure, and this is a preview. Let's begin with the first input type. Input types serve as a way allowing the user to enter his or her data. So first step is that I will type in what is called form, and then I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to expand it as that. And then in the form, we have one attribute called action. What does it mean? The action here is going to take the data the user is going to put into the server, and the action will send that data to the server for processing. In case we have backend, we are going to reference here as our API endpoint. But since we are getting started, I'm going to remove this one from here. Now, the next step is that I'm going to provide the input types. If I type input and enter, as you can see, I have the type is equal to text, meaning that I want the user to provide a text. So if I save this one and then preview it here, we have the input type. And in here, I can enter my name, likewise a number. So for this one, we can specifically determine that, hey, we want this particular input field or type to accept only text or number. But as it stands right now, this is not descriptive. It doesn't provide much information about the user what this type of input means. This is where we have one more attribute called placeholder. For the placeholder, I can enter something like enter full name. The purpose of the placeholder is that it is going to provide much information about this particular input field. As you can see, we have enter full name. As soon as I start entering, the placeholder is nowhere to be found. And apart from the placeholder, we also have what is called label. The label here also going to provide information about the input field. So if I say enter full name or just full name, and let's see, as you can see, we have it as that. The next one is going to be the number. So I'm going to call this one as text input or just text input. And I'm going to have one for number. So in here, I'm going to have a comment as, and it goes like, I'm going to provide the label and I will say age. And before I continue, let me explain the for attribute here. This is going to help us. When we click on the age, it's going to focus on the input field. For example, the full name here, if I click on the full name, the input field needs to be focused. By the moment, it is not doing anything because we need to provide an ID to the input field, and I can say name or just full name. And then for the value for the for is going to be as full name. Now with this one, if I reload and then when I click on the enter full name, as you can see, the input field has been focused. That's the purpose for the for attribute. Alright, so let me do the same thing for the age. I will say for attribute here is age, and then the input here is equal to number. And for this one, there will be no placeholder. You can add it. As you can see for this one, I cannot type any text except numbers. And as you can see that the input fields are inline. They are moving on a new line. So we can break that one by placing them in a div or by using what is called the div tag. So I'm going to wrap this one in a div so that I'm going to see it on a new line as that. As you can see, the first one and the second one, there is no space between them. So I'm going to wrap this one also in a div just to make them to be on top of each other. Let me format it like that, and like that, and like that. Okay. So if I reload, this is what we have. But I want to have some spacing. Therefore, I'm going to use what is called BR, and that is break. Now, if I reload, not that one, supposed to be outside the div. This one, I want to have some spacing between the first div and then the second div. So if I reload, I have some spacing. Don't worry, when you get to CSS, you're going to improve this one a little bit. For the meantime, let's understand the input types. So we have one for the number. And let me copy this one and paste for the next one. And to make things simple, I'm going to remove the for attribute here. I believe you know what it means. Before we continue, let me remove the for attribute here. At this point, I believe you know what it means. Let me prove to you one more time. For example, the age here. If I don't provide ID for the input field, that is equal to the for attribute here. Let's see. If I click on the age, as you can see, the input field is not being focused. But for the full name, as you can see, it worked because I provided the value called full name on the label and ID equal to full name. Alright, so for the meantime, let's remove these guys. The next one is going to be password. In case you want a user to enter password, then I'm going to provide it by using the type as password. And reload. For the password, if I enter, as you can see the behavior of it, that is how it worked. I'm going to copy this, paste it here. The next one is going to be email. So change the password to email, and then the type here is equal to email. So for the email, it is going to validate the email address in case it is wrong or correct. So the next one is going to be the URL. Let's say you want a user to enter URL, supposed to be 1M here. Likewise this and that. So I will say URL input, and let's say URL, and then the type here, which is very important, as URL. This is going to validate web addresses to make sure that they are in the right format. And the next one is going to be the telephone input. So let me copy this and paste. change this one to telephone or just phone number, and then change this one to tel, that is telephone. So this is also going to validate phone numbers to make sure that they are in the right format. And you also have what is called number input. This one, we're going to specify the minimum and then the maximum. So I'm going to paste it here and change this one to number input with min and maximum values. So if I say this one as number, or let me say age, for the age, we want to specify, change this one to a number. We want to specify the minimum age and then the maximum age. So I will say min is equal to 0, and then maximum is equal to, let's say, 25 years. Change this one to 18 and 25, meaning that we want the user to be between 18 and then 25. So with this one, if I reload and if I enter, let's say 90 and submit, I will get some error saying that the maximum value here is 25. All right, so it's going to validate the input with optional minimum and maximum values. And apart from the number input, we also have what is called range. Okay, so change this one to, this is going to provide a slider to select a value within a range. So I will say range here, and then just change this one to range. Let's see, if I reload, we have the range that is between these values, minimum and then the maximum. All right, the next one is going to be date input. Change this one to date input. This is going to allow a user to select a date. So the type here is equal to date, and then remove this one, and let's see, and I have the date picker. All right, the next one is going to be time. I'm going to copy this one, paste it here as time input, change this one to time, and the type here is time, and reload. I have the time picker, and we also have month. So copy and paste as month input, change this one to month, reload, and I can select only month. All right, the next one is going to be week as week input, change this one to week, reload, and I can select only week. All right, the next one is going to be color input, and change this one to color. So for the color, I can select a color of my choice. All right, and the next one is going to be checkbox input. This is going to allow a user to select a single or multiple selections. So I'm going to change this one to checkbox, and I will say select your courses or your course. And let's see, if I reload, as you can see, I have the checkboxes here, and if I add one more, I will see multiple checkboxes, and I can select multiple or single. And we have one called radio button. Let me copy this, and then here paste that. I will say for radio buttons, we can select a single selection from multiples, but for checkboxes, we can select multiple things. So I'm going to change this one to radio and remove this one, and let's reload. For the radio button, we can select one item at a time, and let's have one for file upload. So I will say, and then the type here is equal to file, and let's see, and we have the option to select a file. Alright. And the next one is going to be text area. Paste that, change this one to text area. The text area allows multi-line text input. So if I say here as description, for this is going to use a different syntax. We're using text area, and then remove this one for now. With this one, save it, and let's see. And we have the text area where I can enter in a multi-line. But we can control the weight of the text area by providing what is called rows. For the rows, I can say 10, and then the columns, let me say it is equal to 60. This one will change the height and weight of my text area. Alright, so the next one is going to be drop down, and that is select. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and I will say select drop down, and the label here I will say select, and then remove this one. This is how we implement the select. Type in the select and enter, and then for the meantime remove the IDs and then the name, and then inside we're gonna provide what is called option, which is this one. For the option, we're gonna provide what is called a value. So I will say, let me say our courses. So I will say HTML for the value, and then in here I will say HTML. So what does it mean for the value here and then this one over here? For the meantime, let me save it and then let's reload and see the effect. We have the select here. Let me add more. I'm gonna change this one to CSS, and then change this one to JavaScript, and change this one to Node.js. Now let's reload and let's see the options. This is what we have. So let me explain what is going on over here. We have the option and then the value. The value here is equal to HTML, and we have the value here in the tag as HTML. This was going to be visible to the user, but what is in the value is what is going to be sent to the server for processing. So in here I can say that my HTML, as soon as I select HTML and submit, this value will be sent to the server, but not this one. Alright, so make it more descriptive. And then lastly, we're gonna have a button where I can do what? Register, and provide a type called submit. This one will submit the data to the server. At the moment we don't have it. So let me reload, and we have the button here for registration. Alright guys, so these are the common input types that we are going to use a lot. As we move on, we're going to use them in real world cases. Let's continue in the next video. Let's talk about tables in HTML. A table is a structured way to display data in rows and columns, similar to spreadsheet. And they are used to organize data and present information in a clear and readable format. The key note here is that it is used to organize data in a readable way. And to be able to use tables unless you understand its component, and that is what makes up table. Let's use this diagram for illustration. The first concept is rows and columns. So we are going to explain rows. And rows are always from left to right. So let's say that this is our first row, and we can have one more row, and it goes on like that. So for this table, we have 7 rows. 1, 2, 3, up to 7. And they are moving from where? Left to right. Now that we know what is a row, let's talk about columns. Columns are always from top to bottom. So let's say for this table, you're gonna have column 1. As you can see, this is the column 1 from top to bottom. And we can have column 2 and column 3. So for this table, we have 3 columns and then 7 rows. Now you know what is a column and then a row. What about table head? The table head is going to contain the information about the data, in this case the first one. And then the data is what we call the table data. As you can see, for the table head, we have name with the data called email, age as a table head, and then city with these values. So this is what we call the table head and then the table data. And each of these is called a cell. Understanding this concept will help you to use tables in HTML. Now that we have the concept, let's get back to code. I have created a folder called table, and then I have added my index.html, and this is a preview. I have the h1 and then the horizontal rule, and that is the hr. So how can we use tables in HTML? We are going to create a table for student grade. So in here, I'm gonna bring in the table as that, and then I will open it as that. So I'm gonna have what is called the table head. So let me add a comment as what? th, and that is the table head. And it goes like this, th, and then inside we're gonna have our first row. In this case, the data in the table head. So it means that this row is going to contain the individual table heads. So I'm gonna bring in my table row, and that is a tr, and I'm gonna expand it as that. And then for the individual data, we are going to place it in th, and that is the table head. So first of all, I'm gonna provide a name. If I reload, I have the name here. Let me increase the zoom level, and then I'm gonna have one more th for the subject, for the student, and then I'm gonna have th for the grade. Now with this, let's reload, and this is what we have. Now it's time for us to add the individual content, for example email with science and grade, either A+ or B. So it means that we're gonna have a table row for the first student. So back to the code, I'm done with the table head. The next one is the table body as tbody. And then inside, I'm gonna have the first row for the first student record. So in here, it goes like td for table data. The first one, I'm gonna name it as Emmanuel. This means that under the name, we have the first data, in this case, Emmanuel. If I add one more td, it goes for the what? The subject. So if you type td and then hit enter, I will say math. Alright, so if I reload the page, I have Emmanuel and then math under the subject. The next one is a grade. So I'm gonna have one more td for the grade, and I will say A+. Reload, and here we go. In this case, we have one row for the table head, and then in the table body, we have one row for the actual content. So I'm gonna add one more data. It means that it will be below this. Therefore, I'm gonna have a table row for the next content. So I'm going to have tr for the next table row, and then td table data. I will use John Doe, and for the subject td, let me use the same math, and then td I will say just A. So if I reload, I have the second data for John Doe. If I want, the next record is going to be tr, and then I'm gonna have td, I will say Thomas, and then td for the subject, I can say science, and then the TD is going to be the grade, I will say B or B plus. Okay, assuming that. So let's see what we have, and indeed we have something like this. So this is how we use tables in HTML. But at this point, the table looks ugly. So let's add some CSS to style this table. Don't worry, we have a section to talk about CSS. Let me show you some simple code for using CSS. To write CSS, we're gonna write it in the head tag. In case you are new to CSS, don't worry, we have a section to talk about it. So bring in style, and then inside we are going to select the element that we want to style. In this case, I want to style the table, so I'm going to select by typing in table here and then my curly braces. So inside, I'm going to provide a width, I'm going to say 100%. And I'm going to have what is called the border collapse, which is this one, and make it collapse. Let me reload, and we have something like this. I'm going to select the table head, which is TH. In this case, this one. So up here, type TH, comma, and then TD, meaning I'm selecting multiple elements to style. So TH and then TD. Once again, in case you are new to CSS, pardon me for that, just type as I'm doing. We have a section to talk about it. I'm going to provide a border, and I will say 1 pixel solid black. And then reload, and we have the border as that. And then let me have a padding of say 8 pixels on all sizes, and then text align. Let me push to left and reload, and we have something like this. And let me give it a background color for the table head. So I'm gonna select the TH, and I will say background color. I'm gonna use hashtag F2 F2 F2, and let's see. And we have the background color as that. To make it more visible, let me change the color to something like this. Reload, and this is what we have. I can change the color on the text to something like white. We have something like this. Once again, we have a section to talk about CSS. So guys, this is how we use tables in HTML. Let's talk about HTML rules. Understanding some of the rules when using HTML will help you to write better and readable HTML code. One thing about HTML is that it is a forgiving markup language, which means that if you are wrong or do something wrong in your code, HTML will not give you any feedback, but instead your code will not run or behave as you are expecting. So let's look at some of these rules. I have created a new folder called HTML rules with one file called index.html, and I have scaffolded my HTML to have something like this. And this is a preview. The first rule is the document structure. This means that anytime you begin to write HTML code, unless you follow the recommended format. And the first one is that it must start with the doc type to ensure the document is interpreted correctly, meaning to determine the kind of version of the HTML you are using so that it can be interpreted correctly. And next is that use the root element, and the root element here is the HTML, and also include the head tag. The next rule is the tag syntax. As we spoke about, tags are enclosed in the angle bracket. That goes like this, and in here you can provide your tag name. So make sure that always your tags are being enclosed, so you cannot write something like this and then you start coding, meaning that this tag is not in what? In an angle bracket. and most of the tags comes in pairs, and that is an opening and then the closing tag. For example, the H1 or the H or the heading tags, it comes with what? Opening and then the closing tags. As we spoke about, we have self-closing tags and non-self-closing tags. For H1, they have opening and then the closing tags. So make sure that your tags are being enclosed. And we also have self-closing tags. For example, BR or the HR. As you can see here for this, we don't have the closing tag as HR. It is self-closing. So in this case, we can maintain it as it is, or you can bring the /. The choice is up to you. The / is optional for self-closing tags. And next step is the attribute. And the attributes are placed within the opening tag. For example, for the H1, I can provide additional attribute. When I say attribute, it is anything that has been passed in the opening tag. And the purpose here is that it is going to use to modify the H1 or the tag, or add some functionalities to the element. When I say element, it comprises of the tag itself, the attribute, and then the actual content. Alright, so I can provide additional attribute, but it must be in the opening tag. For example, style. I cannot bring the attribute in the closing tag here as style and then provide the value. It will not work. So now you know where to use attributes. For example, image, img, we pass in the opening tag as that. And next rule is that attributes values should be enclosed in double quote. So for example, for the SLC, the value must be in double quote as this. But you can use single quote as this, but normally we use double quote. The value must be in the double quote. And next rule is what is called nesting. When I say nesting, it simply means that putting one element or tag into another. For this code, we have nested some element. So let's look at the body here. In the body, we have H1, the horizontal rule, and then the image. This means that the H1, HR, and then the image are nested in the body. So to prove to you that it has been nested, bring your cursor to this area here, and if I collapse, as you can see, we don't see the element inside the body. This means that we have nested those elements in the body tag. Likewise, in the head tag, we have this element being nested. And if I collapse, as you can see, it has been nested. And for the HTML tag here, we have the head and body being inside. So if I collapse, this is what we have. So this is what we call the nesting. So we can nest many elements, but make sure that you are properly nesting the tags within each other. And we normally use div for nesting. I can say I have div 1 and I can have my H1 here, one more div, and then nest one more div with some additional content. This is what we call nesting. And next step is the white spacing. When I say white spacing, HTML ignores white spacing. So let me come down here and let me have p tag here, and let me add some content. And below here, I'm gonna add one more tag as H1, and I will say welcome. When I say white spacing, they are the spacing between the elements. In this case, there is a white spacing. So if I have more white spacing, likewise this one, what do you expect on the page? Do you expect the white spacing to be appeared on the browser when I reload? Alright, so let's try. If I reload, as you can see, we don't have much spaces in the code as we see in the browser. This means that HTML ignores white spacing. So when you code, try to avoid many white spacing to make your code more readable. Alright, and next step is the head element, which is this one. In the head element, it contains some meta information such as the title, character set, and links to style sheet and script. So in the head tag, we provide those documents or links. And next rule is that use comments as much as you can to provide much information about your code. And next rule is uppercasing. HTML is case insensitive, which means that either you write it in uppercase or lowercase, it will work. So if I say H1 with all uppercase, and if I say Masintech, now let's see, reload, and we have Masintech. It is case insensitive. So even if I write Dave with all uppercasing and add some content, I will still see the content, which means that they are case insensitive. Even though it worked, but we normally use lowercasing. So try to use the lowercasing for the tags. And next rule is accessibility, which means that use meaningful alt attributes for images. So let's say we have image tag. Let me have image tag here as img. And then for the source, I can place any link over here. But what I'm talking about here is the alt attribute. Try to use meaningful message here or content. The alt attribute is going to help for accessibility, especially those who are impaired, and that is who have some problems when it comes to vision. So in here, we're going to provide some description about the image. Let's say that we have an image for a car. We can say that image for a car. Alright, so as we move on, I will be exploring some of the rules, but these are the common rules that you need to bear in mind when dealing with HTML. We are switching from coding to customize our code editor, in this case Visual Studio Code. When I say customization, for example, in case we want to change the theme of our Visual Studio Code, we can do that. And also, we are going to modify it or customize it to improve our development process. At the moment, in case we want to open our project, unless we get into the folder and then open the file. And also, in case you want to see the update, unless we reload before you're going to see it. But we have an extension that's going to make our life easier, and that is Live Server. So click on this icon called extensions and then search for Live Server, which is this one, and then go ahead and then install it. After installing, let's try to use it, and we have some icon here called Go Live. Or if I right click, I will see Open with Live Server and click on that. And indeed, it is running on this server. So with this one, anytime I make changes to my HTML code and then save it, automatically is going to be updated on the page. So let's say that I want to change this one to HTML version 2, save it, and let's see. And as you can see, it has been